Good afternoon, and welcome to our weekly Tuesday webinar. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. I am joined today by Susie Carello. Welcome back, Susie, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. Hello. New York Charter Schools, the SUNY Charter Schools Institute. I'm that happy to see you that
This is like my job swap.
Right. Ed David Frank, welcome. David, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSID. Aaron Cochran from New York City DOE, welcome, Aaron. And Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center, welcome, Corey. A few updates from the association before turning it over to Susie, David, and Aaron, and then fielding some questions. First, we'll start off in New York. Absentee ballot counting started today. We'll talk about elections for a bit. Just to say that by law in New York, the ballot counting could not start before today, so they're doing that now. The final counting of all the ballots will confirm who are the members of the Senate and the Assembly in January, very important to all of us, as well as who all of the other absentee ballot votes cast by New Yorkers. And once we have those final votes, we will update you on the results when they are confirmed. We will not torture you with the bits and drabs of information and tea leaf reading and forecasting. So again, once we have those all that information confirmed, we will update you on final results and anything on what we think that might mean at the time. On the national front, former Vice President Joe Biden is now President-elect Joe Biden. Senator Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has made history as the first woman, first black woman, first Indian, first Asian person to be elected Vice President in the U.S. We are eagerly awaiting what a new administration will mean for the country, for the state, and in particular for a COVID funding relief package for the states and what Governor Cuomo and the legislature will do in terms of cuts to state aid, of course. The governor has stated he is confident that a federal relief package will be approved by Congress. That is good news. It's too soon right now to know what a package would look like or when it will be proposed or passed. But if the governor is encouraged that the federal funding will come, that may mean it's likely that state aid cuts will continue to be on hold and hopefully never come to pass. But as we wait until the aid comes through, at least hopefully all of that will be on hold, and we'll be talking about what packages might look like as opposed to what cuts will come. We will, of course, keep you updated. Similarly, let me just say this. We won't steal David's thunder, but as you likely saw, the January regents have been canceled. We're going to drop links to the memo and the FAQ document into the chat, and we know David will share additional details and field any questions on that later in the webinar. Similarly, the Fiscal Transparency Report is now live. Submissions are due on November 30th, and thanks to the SUNY Finance Gurus, there is guidance that matches your audited financials to the reporting categories. And again, I don't want to steal Susie's thunder here, but we encourage you to log in and review the reporting well in advance of the deadline. We will also, there will be office hours this Friday as well as Friday the 20th from SUNY folks, and SUNY and SED will participate and will be able to answer questions and help troubleshoot during these sessions. Be on the lookout for specific timing and login information for that. So while this might feel like yet another bothersome reporting requirement, it is required by federal law as a component of financial reporting. And we believe it will ultimately produce more and better data about school funding and spending. And of course, that information can be a powerful advocacy tool when we can use it to show how charter schools deliver for students. So we encourage you to take that task, both because to follow the letter, but as well as the spirit of the law and the results from that. There are new updates to red, orange, and yellow zones, which now include Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. You can see updated maps of the zones in the link we're dropping in the chat. Note that the biggest implication is for schools that are providing in-person instruction, whether remote or hybrid. Whether full in-person or hybrid, in which case you're required to test 20% of your staff and student population on a weekly basis. County departments of health are providing free testing resources to accomplish this testing. If your school is newly in a color zone and you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to add here too, even if you are not newly in a color zone, you should reach out. If you have not been in contact with your local county Department of Health, we encourage you to reach out. If you tried but have been unsuccessful, I know you may be frustrated. We encourage you to keep trying. Breaking through on this and connecting with someone can help get information directly to your school on a local level, which is extremely valuable. Local counties, some of the local county health departments have school specialists whose job it is to do just that, reach out and have contact and talk to schools. So we encourage you to do that, develop that relationship now. It's a point of pain and frustration, I'm sure, for many people, and it seems fruitless. But again, breaking through on that is at this point invaluable and probably going into the future. In the meantime, we have reached out to New York State DOH, the Governor's Office, as well as New York State Association of County Health Officials. We are keeping tabs and trying to make inroads on making it easier for our schools to get testing, information about testing, and see if we can help encourage some changes on a policy level, hopefully in the short term, to make sure that you not only have access to testing, but to the personnel needed to provide the testing and take this to its logical conclusion. A link with the phone numbers for local departments of health throughout the state is in the chat. So finally, we have received questions from schools regarding the recent notice that went out about Title I Supplement Not Supplant survey, namely about whether charters are required to complete the survey. While charters are exempt from the requirements of supplement not supplant and comparability, they still need to complete the surveys. When schools identify that they are charters in the surveys, they will be exited out of each survey. Each survey for charters will take less than 5 minutes. All right, that's what I have. So I'm going to turn it over to you all for updates, any updates from your team. And I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to allow right now. I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to start with Aaron. I'm going to see if what's good in New York City. We'll start there first.
Howdy, everyone. Good afternoon. So no major updates from us. We have begun some charter renewal visits, which is very exciting. And I would just encourage any schools that have not already submitted your November 2nd requirements into CHIPS to please do so. But that is authorizing in New York City right now.
All right, great. Thank you, Aaron. Susie, welcome back. Would you like to provide an update?
Thanks, Yumika. Thanks, everybody. Personal point of preference or privilege. Thanks to everybody. A number of you reached out. And Sam is doing extraordinarily well. And I know all the good energy that you all sent his way and my way made a huge difference. So thanks a bunch. Barb Achenauer, I think, is lurking here somewhere, the mighty managing director for finance and operations at the Charter Schools Institute, who said I needed to stand up, shout, and applaud in the midst of a pandemic. The audits were in such a timely way. Everybody's audits in, done. They're furiously filling up the academic dashboard, the financial dashboards, so that they can be listed on our website. So thank you everyone for doing that. And again, just I know Barb's participating in the office hours and the whole finance team, as well as the rest of us at the Institute. But we frequently follow their lead, is available to help with any of the ESSA reporting that you need. And that's my update. Thanks again.
All right, great. Thank you. David, hi. Do you have an update for us today?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so we're excited that the ESSA fiscal transparency reports are up and running, and thanks to Janet Klein on my team, who's fielded all those questions and helped people get their data in. And Janet looks forward to participating in those town halls as well. As you mentioned, Regents exams for January were canceled, but the safety net and exemptions are still in effect. And so that just reiterates the importance of reporting those exemptions to ensure that your students are getting credit for the courses that they're taking, the Regents-bearing courses that they're taking, particularly if they transfer from your school, that when they go to a new setting, that they will get that credit. Like many memos, and I know there's a plethora of memos out there, we do have all of them up on our website. It really is a one-stop shop. And I just put the link in the chat. So check it out if you're not sure how to report those exemptions. The ESSER or ESSER applications, however you pronounce it, are due on the 23rd of November. You can ask for an extension, but please get those back in. We know it's a pain in the neck, but we don't want to leave any money on the table, and the state does want to make sure that you're getting the funding for your students that you need and that you're entitled to. So please get those ESSER applications in. And guess what? The memo on how to do so is on the link to that I just provided. Oh, I didn't mention that the ESSA fiscal transparency data is due by the 30th of this month as well. That is all on my end.
All right, great, thank you. We don't have any pre-planned questions. I do see we have a couple questions already coming in about the cluster color-coded zone initiative. We're just going to turn it right over to the Q&A.
Great, so we can start with those. And I think that this is really a case where, because this is through the Department of Health, so just to be really clear, the color zones are not determined by authorizers. The activities that happen are not mandated by authorizers. But I think that this is great fodder for this type of a conversation, because I know every single one of us in the sort of Brady Bunch squares right now have had conversations about this and might have tiny pieces of different information. So I'll pose the questions that are in the Q&A, but I would really encourage everyone who has had a conversation and has awareness to please chime in. So on that note, a couple similar questions that Tiffany is asking that sort of parallel each other about how schools in yellow zones are documenting this 20% of their staff and in-person staff and student population, the testing that they are required to do. So I'm going to test my understanding. So there's still a daily DOH report. And if you're in the yellow zone, it asks you about number of tests. But then I think the second piece is actually the fundamental rub for charter schools, which is if you're not a charter school, these tests are being done by the DOH. And so they automatically know. And so the compliance is actually in the performance. And then this is the additional wrinkle for charters. Respond. Does this align with people's understanding? Would you answer that differently? Would you be giving schools any guidance who are newly in these zones or who have been in these zones? And Corey, at the risk of putting you on the spot, if you have a different understanding or additional information, like please also.
I'll jump in first, I think. And I would just say, Anna, right, you're spot on. The sort of the overarching requirement is that school COVID report card website, whatever the dashboard information that you have to put in, that's where the state's going to get their information. That's where they know where all your testing happens. So that is the document. Whatever you keep on the back end, you keep on the back. But you need to make sure you put the information in there, and you want to check to see what your results are. Are you at 20% or not in terms of what you're putting in?
Yeah, so I can speak, and again, I know we've had some non-New York City districts, so what I will say is I do want to caveat. I think everyone who is in a yellow zone, if you haven't seen already, there was, I think a 1 to 2 page memo that the state put out on October 9th, and that left a lot of questions unanswered in terms of how to provide yellow zone testing, which in New York City, the Department of Health interpreted meant that there was a lot of flexibility. And so what the New York City Department of Health came up with, and I'm posting in the chat now, was basically 3 different options that they provided to charters and non-publics in New York City about how to comply. And I will tell you that working with a lot of the New York City charter schools, most of the schools actually selected to do the option where you send out staff and students, again, 20%, and you get to pick the 20%. There is no requirement that it has to be exactly 20% staff, exactly 20% students. And in fact, my understanding is a lot of schools actually relied more heavily on staff to go get tested, just because it was easier to, get compliance that way. And some folks actually told more than 20% to go get it. So you cushioned yourself a little bit. And schools would tell folks by like Sunday, Monday, hey, it's your time to go get tested this week. You can actually have the same people get tested every week that you're in the yellow zone. There are no requirements about randomization or that different groups are tested. And then by Friday, what I think a lot of the schools were asking folks to do is just to bring back a receipt that said they went and got tested. It is not the actual results. You don't need to, the individual employer student does not need to confirm positive or negative. The idea being that the COVID track and trace team, even though there was a big mistake, as I'm sure many of you saw in the press this week with a student in Brooklyn, but beyond that, they would actually contact you if someone was positive. Of course, students and teachers, I think, were probably telling staff, saying they weren't, but that's not the requirement. And so the school was just keeping just the receipt to show that they actually know that someone went and got tested. Again, it could be at a city hospital, city MD, their own personal doctor, wherever they could get a test. And folks were just keeping a copy of that receipt. And then, as Anna said, on Friday, there's a special screen that pops up for yellow zone schools where you are just essentially entering the delta of how many folks got tested that you know of. And because you're already reporting how many people are actually in your building during the week, you're obviously trying to match it so that you hit that 20%. So I think that, I think there is the option to, there are the free tests. So I will just say, as the New York City charters learned very quickly, they are free tests, but they do not come freely administered. You would have to pay someone who has the exact certifications that are required to actually get the tests and then do them. So I think that's where a lot of schools ended up deciding not to go that route, though that route is obviously available and the test would be free. And there's a way for New York City charters to order them directly from the city Department of Health. So I would assume for other local health departments, they will work out a similar mechanism, but you as the charter school would be responsible for financing the person who would actually do the testing or the lab that would come in or something like that.
Yeah, and just three additional notes on that. One is we have lined up a private lab that will come and do this if you want. It is cash money for each test, but if that's something that you want to pursue, let us know. It's definitely an option. The other is that, and Yomika can speak more to this, she's having conversations with the powers that be around the permissions that are necessary for a nurse to be sufficiently blessed to be able to administer these tests, so that theoretically, if there are free tests that could be dropped off in your building, whoever is your school nurse would be, in theory, able to administer them. And then the only last note that I would give, which is just super personal, is that my daughter actually had to get a COVID test in order to return to school because she had a bit of the, she ralphed, and kids do. And I was really gratified to realize, and I would never have otherwise known, so I'm only sharing in this context, that our pediatrician actually has a standing hour of the morning and a standing hour of the afternoon for essentially just like for just COVID testing. And certainly we're patients there, but I say that to say, I think that there's sort of more options out there than people realize. And certainly the simplest thing is that there's someone physically in your building who's just 20%, sort of cranking it out on a weekly basis. But there are definitely other workarounds. And if you are sending kids home, like my daughter, and they have to get tested anyways, that counts too. So make sure whoever in your building is collecting that information about anyone who would have been excluded, staff or students, based on your policies, that when they are returning with a negative test, that you're counting that towards your rate.
And I'll just add, I see a question already coming in about the forms to get permission to your nurse administrator. And I know it's Evan and he's in New York City. So I will just say, we hope Yumika may be successful, but at this point, the New York City Department of Health has been unequivocal that charter nurses that are employed by the Department of Health in New York City are not available at this point to do COVID testing. So that might be separate if you are out of New York City and you are contracting with a private nurse. This might be there might be other options, but if you're using a New York City DOH nurse provided to you by the city at this point, that's still not an option for charters to use. Sorry.
Right. Oh, yeah, and I would just add to that, Corey, absolutely. And those are the kind of things that we're trying to figure out if, are there ways to address this, right? We understand what the need is. Schools need to have this testing to stay open. We want all the kids to have the option to get the education where and how and when they need it. If we can get, right, our state and local folks to come together on policies that help do that, we're trying to do that, including and I'm not going to go down a giant rabbit hole here, but for example, in the original Executive Order 202, there, and David may be able to weigh in and say more about this, there were requirements waived for who could give the test in terms of what you had to have in terms of your background. Whether or not those things, one, can we use some of that to help get more people who may not be the school nurse, but someone else, health-related professional, to be able to administer those tests? How can we find a core group of those folks in the areas around the state where we need it most to be able to do that and get the schools get testing? That requires conversations. That requires some creative thinking and some willingness, and that's the kind of thing we're trying to work on. Conversations I hope to have over this week and maybe next. So I'm going to, in the chat, though, I'm going to drop in here, for anyone who hasn't seen it, the New York State Department of Health interim guidance on the COVID-19 test out for microcluster zones. And so I encourage schools, again, if you haven't read this, take a look at it. It has some of the information on terms of, you'll see things like something, and I'll be very honest, the team here at the association raised the LSLs, and you'll see that in the document. Are these some of the things that we can start to think about? How do we get this to work for charter schools, get some of these exceptions, and the state seems to be, since the state seems to be willing to try to make this easier, how do we make that a reality? So we take that from the policy on the paper and the good ideas to here's what we need on the ground to make it happen. And with that, I'll move on.
Well, I think we have one last sort of group effort question from Kay, who's saying they're newly out of the yellow zone, but the daily screening is still saying that they're in the yellow zone. Is this just a timing thing that the daily screening platform hasn't caught up with the governor's office, or is there something else we should know? My guess is that it's a timing thing, but I don't want to say that and be the only person who says that and give you bad advice. So other thoughts, Corey? I see you're unmuting. Yeah,
I think so. Kay, you and I have had many conversations. This is what I tell schools. This is a good faith effort. I think there are definitely mistakes being made along the way. Clerical errors have happened to some schools, we know. So yes, I would err on the side of you do not need to worry about it because you have officially received notification that you are not a yellow zone. And if for some reason it were to come back on you, that is the exact documentation and proof that I would be sending back to say, well, this is why we didn't comply this week, because we received notification that we are no longer in the yellow zone. So keep those emails. That's all I'll say. But yes, I think you're okay.
That's great advice. And I'll just say at a 50,000 foot level, thank you and congratulations for still having children in your building, because that is what we are built to do. And we have to continue to fight for that sort of creativity and urgency that I think we all have felt at different points during this, but it's hard to hold on to, and especially in light of some of these complexities and challenges and lack of information. But I will tell you, as a parent of 3 charter kids, it makes even those 2 days a week huge difference, and not just to my sanity, but to their attachment to, but to my sanity too, but to their investment in their own learning. So I think with that, all of the remaining questions that I see seem to be specific to New York City. And so, Corey, I will pass it over to you.
Sure. I'll just start. I see a question in the chat about If we are in person and the school isn't in red, but the teachers or staff or students live in red, does this matter? And what we've heard is no, that doesn't matter at all. This came up many times in New York City. You know, obviously people move a lot in the city to go to different schools, so it does not matter. It matters about the location of the school. It does not matter where people are traveling from. I see a question. So hello, everyone. So I'll start by saying, those of you in New York City, we will have our weekly call with the Department of Health this Friday. I'll drop in the chat in a second the invite in case you haven't had a chance to register. Of particular note, there was a new DOH commissioner order that came out last Friday, which I know some schools were slightly concerned about, but essentially it was just really trying to enforce, as New York City has seen an increase in cases, that, you know, we should be all charter and private schools need to be also maintaining social distancing, 6 feet, masks, all that stuff. So I think I don't think this was of any surprise to anything that schools are doing. But, you know, folks have questions or just general DOH questions, we will be on again on Friday. And I will introduce Erin, and I know she's already said she wants to answer a question live, but before I do, I'll just ask her if she had any more general announcements she wanted to make, or if you just want to dive right into your DOE updated travel advisory screening question.
Sure. Thanks, Corey. Hello, everyone again. So just a couple of quick announcements before we dive into any questions. So between last night and this morning, we did send emails to schools that were either already in a geographic zone that was flagged by the state, or have left that zone, or have had a zone change. So if you were expecting one of those emails and didn't receive one, please let us know at charterschools@schools.nyc.gov. Additionally, a quick request. If your charter school is open for in-person instruction tomorrow, Veterans Day, please let us know as quickly as possible so we can make sure that you have a nurse tomorrow. Currently, we are not planning to staff nurses tomorrow. And then one quick heads up, you will see this in the Charter Schools Weekly that is going out today. But we are launching a new support desk that will eventually, in the next couple weeks, replace our Charter Schools email as the most direct way to get support. So more in that Charter Schools Weekly, but I just encourage all of you to please review it, do the tryout that we're sending to you, just to get used to the system before we actually start using it for support.
Wait, Erin, before you go on, sorry, you need to tell everyone, yes. Charter Weekly comes out Tuesdays now.
Yes, good point, Corey. Yes, so we have modified the schedule. So now the primary day of publication for the Charter Schools Weekly is now Tuesday, not Thursday, and then we will send an addendum as needed on Fridays. So that is a shift. So the main Charter Schools Weekly is planned to go out today. All right, so we can dive into the questions. So Sandy, yes, I did flag this. So currently the DOE screener for entrance to the buildings, DOE buildings, has not changed in response to the exception for travel. So currently that is an exception. The 14-day quarantine is still very much in place in general. And then the state has issued that there is this exception for entrance to the state if you get the testing prior to and then upon return. The DOE screener has not been updated to account for that exception. We are in conversation to determine the timing or implementation of that exception. So we will share more as that goes into process. So currently, anyone who travels outside of the state under those different guidelines would not be able to enter a DOE building for 14 days. And I just want to also add that currently, the idea is that if you are in a DOE building and you do have your own screener, you are more than welcome to make that screener that you have more restrictive to building entrance, but you cannot make it less restrictive. So currently, anyone in a DOE building cannot implement that exception until the DOE screener is modified, if it is modified.
And I'll just add, and Erin, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we've discussed this, it is your understanding that this will be a decision known pretty quickly, just because as folks prepare for Thanksgiving travel, I know this is a question that a lot of co-located charters are curious about.
Yes, conversations are ongoing as to what this looks like. So yes, we will share more. Hopefully we know more soon. Excellent addition, Corey.
I also see a question about, there was some updated CDC guidelines about what is a close contact. I actually am going to say, so for New York City purposes, New York City had actually already had a pretty restrictive close contact definition. So the way I'm reading this question is, I think the question is SED going to change their definition of close contact? And I don't know if, David, that is something you are aware of, if there is different guidance, if guidance is being updated out of what the regions put out in July.
The state ed department relies on the Department of Health to determine what close contact is. The New York State Department of Health.
Got it. Aaron, question for you on ADA accommodations for staff beyond December, which I believe is staff who is out, who are allowed to work remotely. Do you have any updates if DOE is going to extend those for staff beyond December?
Great question. No updates on that, but let me see if we can share an update soon.
Okay. I see a question on what are the guidelines for screening the screener, and I assume this is the person doing the screening for at schools. So I would defer that to a health question for Friday, unless anyone here, Aaron, wants to take a stab at it. I admittedly do not have guidelines handy.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but for DOE space, the expectation is that any screener that is implemented must have a document that is shown, that is able to be shown upon entering the school. Sorry, I have a crying toddler. And that also it needs to list the specific questions that were answered. So you can't just flash I passed. Someone has to be able to show documentation that they answered at least the questions that are on the DOE screener and any additional questions that you choose to answer or choose to ask.
And with that, I see a few state questions have come in, and I don't know if you want to take those. Otherwise, I will hand
Sure.
it back.
Yeah, we can hit those, and if we could all give everyone give Aaron like some jazz hands or some snaps for the hardest multitasking that there is, which is live Zoom and live parenting. We're with you. We're in solidarity. So Lynn, and I know that we've also had some conversations with Dr. Mendoza. If you could send Yomika and Ashara the document that you're referencing, because we have not seen anything in the governor's guidance about there being this sort of rotating sets of cohorts. And, you know, I don't know that this is necessarily the thing to dispute, but certainly I think it's an opportunity if that's going to be something that is sort of new or specific to Monroe County to really insist that they also support schools in meeting that expectation. Yomika, I don't know if you have other thoughts or more insight based on any of the conversations that you had today. And I may have just put, if you're talking, Yomika, you're on mute.
The county might have the ability to be more strict than the state. I'm not sure if that would extend to, therefore, you know, your school closure or opening, you know, will rely on that. They may require it, but not in terms of requiring that for the results in terms of closure, if that makes sense. I would like to see the document, so thanks for that, Anna. And then we are talking to or involved in conversations with the folks up in the county level health department in Monroe to find out just these kinds of things. It's my understanding that this is for them as well. They were shocked by the announcement on some level in terms of what will be required and what's in it. So everyone, I think, is working through that. And we'll see. I will say this, that to the extent that Dr. Mendoza is saying we have to have 5 cohorts, you have to have 5 cohorts and 20% for each. It will be hard on a public information, I should say, maybe level, to say no, we only want to test 20% and keep it to that 20%. So we will have to figure out sort of what that means and what's the impact, because what Dr. Mendoza sounds like it's saying is, everyone in the school has to be tested. And I think maybe our most successful, if we need to push back on that, is people who are most likely exposed, that kind of thing. But I want to sort of set expectation levels on the ability to change that.
Yeah, the one other thing though, Yomika, I would just say, and obviously this is all like incredibly breaking news, is that we've had lots of other conversations in this forum and similar forums about a school's ability to force or require either staff or students to be tested. And I think the broad consensus is that that's pretty thin ice. And certainly, there could be a cohort of students in particular that it is especially difficult to either get that consent or to get that compliance at a level that you could say very reliably once every 5 weeks, every single person in each of these cohorts is sort of doing as they're told, and that the consequence of their non-compliance accrues to the school and not to the individual, and certainly not to a child or their parents. So it's another thing where it feels like the aim of the policy might be good, but the execution might have to adjust to the reality. That's just me talking. I do not have power over that decision. I'm just saying. I think
if I could add, please, that for the schools in Rochester and Monroe County who are part of our weekly calls, if you could let Ashara know and John know if how you think that this would impact you, or whether or not, before we sort of go charging in, want to make sure that if there are schools that are like, listen, we can figure out our 5 cohorts, we have plenty of people who will be tested, would be tested, could be tested, where this is not an issue for us. We want to know that as well, okay? Because there may be some things where some schools might have plenty of people, not an issue, and we want to make sure that we're respectful for what's real on the ground in Rochester and talking to DOH, to County Department of Health, I should say.
Absolutely. And so, David, I see that you answered a question about the immunization question already in the Q&A, but I do think it's worth speaking aloud. And the question was about schools that are fully remote, giving families additional time to meet the immunization requirements. Yeah, if you're joining us by phone, David's sort of pursing his lips and shaking his head. So David, do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, and I don't want to discount the real fear that parents have to going to a doctor's office or getting a vaccine for their child, but unfortunately, the vaccine requirements are in place, and they're there to protect our larger community, so that instead of talking about COVID-19, we don't want to have to be talking about measles outbreaks and whooping cough and rubella, all things that are, unfortunately more deadly per capita than COVID-19. And we've seen outbreaks in other parts of the country, like California, where the vaccine regimen is not as robust. And, I get that, it's through remote instruction. So what's the harm? But students, whether they're in remote instruction or in-person instruction, they leave the house, they go to the supermarket, they play in playgrounds, they're playing sports with their friends. And so vaccines, and I think COVID has really brought this to the forefront, but vaccines are at the forefront of our public health response to deadly diseases. And so, schools are in a tough position, but we have no choice but to follow the law and our vaccine requirements and exclude children from all educational programming if the parents are not compliant. And you can point them to the New York State Department of Health requirements, and I gave the link. But this is something that unfortunately there's no wiggle room on, and it's for the greater good of our society.
Thank you. I think that covers it. all the news that's fit to webinar. Yumika?
All right, all the news that's fit to webinar. Thank you, everyone. There's a lot of for us to keep track of and tabs on and update you on. Look for emails. Hopefully, folks will be checking on Friday for the office hours as well. And then we'll see you again Tuesday. Have a
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.